Okay, so first of all, as also Dirk mentioned, the EU has been currently very busy with the challenge of the ongoing war in Ukraine. And I wanted to remember that there were two main challenges recently that directly impacted a lot on the progress that had been made in Africa. I would like to start from the COVID-19 pandemic that got a bit, sad to say so, replaced by the ongoing emergency and war in Ukraine. But let's say that the COVID-19 pandemic had it represented quite a challenge in Africa, because this continent that had already a lot of countries that had difficulties in managing their debt actually pushed more than 20 African countries into debt distress, in further distress. As well, the main challenge in Africa in terms of energy has been access to energy. And it's crazy to think so, but 4% more people lived without electricity in 2021 than in 2019. This is the direct impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And it is actually observed that probably this is because the people that were new to affording energy could not afford it anymore. So the progress was immediately reversed. Uh, in fact, during COVID-19, it was also the period where Africa experienced the first economic recession in 25 years. So the gross domestic product contracted quite substantially. And this had also an impact on the income of informal workers in Africa. Their income dropped. And the sad news is that, unfortunately, informal workers make up the majority of workers in Africa. And this, of course, impacted also their capability to pay energy suppliers. And this also shed a light on how these energy suppliers lack financial sustainability. So this is regarding the COVID-19 and the impact it had. But as we mentioned, there is the ongoing Russian invasion in Ukraine. And this has already shown some impact. Of course, we cannot predict how long it will be. We hope the shortest possible. But this has already impacted Africa, precisely on food and fuel prices. Why these two are connected? Because actually Africa has a big reliance on food and fuel imports, and especially on natural gas based fertilizers. So the crisis and the war in Ukraine directly impacts the prices and the affordability of food and transport in a continent that already has these problems. In fact, we can say, although there were these two, there were and there are these two challenges, actually Africa by the end of last year exceeded the expectations of growth, meaning that the expectations were far more negative than the reality. So it showed, in fact, quite a strong resilience. However, these two events provoked what Dirk was also talking about, that the EU got a bit distracted, and the EU is not the only institution that, of course, had to take care of other matters and forgot a bit about Africa. And in fact, we saw during my job the development project were either paused or revoked, in fact. I remember 2 years ago, we had a project that was on connectivity in Africa, which is quite relevant. It was 14 millions and it got revoked. Now, in terms of state of play, where we are, why Africa is important and interesting, also in terms of course, of energy. Now, what is interesting about Africa is that it actually accounts for less than 6% of global energy consumption. So it consumes far less than other continents. And of course, it represents also a very little percentage of cumulative global emissions. However, what is important to mention is that Africa is a growing continent. So already now it's 1/5 of the world's population. And the predictions are that this population will continue to grow. And what is also interesting, it is home to the world's youngest population. So this actually will mean that the demand for modern energy will only expand. Now, another problem paired with the increase in demand, the increase in population, is that the African continent by now presents very strong inequalities, and so this will actually have impact on stability in the region. And this actually directly involves also the EU, because as we know, when we talk about Africa, we usually mention the migration issue. However, solving the energetic problem for the continent could be a way to not see migration from Africa as a threat. Now, if we talk about the first challenge, we can mention directly the access to affordable electricity. Now, access to energy is the 7th SDG, Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and it's been quite a focus when talking about Africa and energy. Now, 600 million people, which make 43% of the total population, lack access to electricity. Now, I should mention that when we talk about Africa, we are talking of the entire continent, but usually, unfortunately, the most problematic area is the sub-Saharan Africa, more than the northern Africa, in terms of energy at least. So what would be the required connection to bring energy to everybody in the region would be 90 million people a year, which means a triplication of the recent rate of recent years. These, of course, represents quite a challenge. However, actually the investment needed to achieve the universal access to modern energy, it's, of course, just 25 billion per year, which seems quite a big sum, but in fact, it's 1% of global energy investments today. So it's not such a huge amount when it's put into perspective. Now, the experts predict that actually one of the main ways to solve the issue, while we guarantee energy access, is to pair energy access and development in electricity with energy efficiency and methods to actually improve this energy efficiency. In fact, this would represent a good way and a good strategy to pair both policies together. One way, in fact, to achieve this would be to put in place codes, energy performance standards, and so on, which would make already 60% of these energy savings. Now, in fact, energy efficiency and the building of these codes and standards is quite a focus in terms of EU projects in many countries. Another big challenge, in fact, it is also the clean cooking fuel. This represents a challenge in terms of course, of energy, because people predominantly, 64% of Africans predominantly rely on wood, agricultural, and animal waste as fuel for cooking. And of course, this has quite a strong impact on in fact the deforestation of many of African countries, and this represents, of course, also a challenge in terms of climate change adaptation. And of course, this represents also a very big problem in terms of health for this population. In of course, in the challenge is different depending on urban areas and more rural areas. The problem is mainly big in rural areas because they have less access to more opportunities in terms of clean cooking fuels. So the main problem, again, in terms of clean cooking fuel is in fact the price of such appliances that makes it difficult for the average African to access it. And this was also higher prices were also seen, especially during the pandemic, as we said. And so this meant that actually many families that initially accessed to these appliances had to go back to charcoal and very other kind of alternatives. So this is quite a big challenge for the continent. And in fact, it also represents an opportunity because once this is solved, actually, it would allow to reduce premature deaths, which are quite big in number, but also this would allow for actually gender equality, which is something that we might not think in terms of energy, but in fact mainly in a big number of these countries, it's women that take care of course of the cooking, but also of actually finding the fuel that is used for cooking. This means that it takes a lot of time for them, and it takes them away from education, employment, and civic involvement, and so on. Another problem, another challenge is the lack of strategy. What do we mean by lack of strategy? Now, actually, only 25% of these countries had.
Arrivederci.
Oh, sorry. It's my Siri, sorry. So it's in 25%, 25 countries of 54 African countries had a clear energy access strategy. Now, this might seem not so problematic in view of the challenges we presented before, but it actually is a great burden, and it's a great obstacle to moving forward, because in fact in these countries what is lacking is institutional capacity, and what is lacking is also a clear idea of where the country wants to go. In fact, a success case in Africa is represented by Rwanda. Rwanda, in fact, is in line with its goals in terms of energy and climate change, precisely because it has set out a very clear roadmap, which might seem normal, but it's actually one of the biggest challenges in these countries. And this also prevents from having a cooperation among many actors in the field, so among governments, among private sector, among investors, and so on. In fact, a regulatory framework, as I was mentioning, is missing in many of these countries, or it's patchy, meaning that you have a regulatory framework only for one kind of energy, and then you are missing completely a framework on another kind of energy. Then each country actually has very different bases, so standardization is missing. But standardization not only among countries, but also within regions of the country is missing. And this is a problem because it actually does not allow to reach scale and actually to be interesting for private investment. And this actually does not allow as well to coordinate efforts. Another challenge, which is also one of the biggest one, is the lack of infrastructure. So much of the energy supply infrastructure that we have in place nowadays in Africa is either needing of expansion, is either needing repairing. In fact, it is also very as well patchy, meaning that much of this infrastructure is actually located in few countries that have access to the sea, and of course that are better connected in terms of trade. But the more internally we go in sub-Saharan Africa, and the less infrastructure stability we have, and this is a big problem, in fact, because it does not allow to have reliable access to fuel and to energy in general. The problem is also that not only we need an investment in terms of infrastructure, which is estimated to 345 billions, but is also the need for increased investment in digitalization. So what do we mean by this is that it's not sufficient for such rural areas and for such a big continent to have more infrastructure, but is also needed to pair it with the digitalization that allows to actually check on the infrastructure, how it's working, and its maintenance. So this represents quite a challenge, because given that the resources in terms of investment are reduced, the tendency is to actually go only for the building of new infrastructure without taking care, in fact, of maintaining what it has already been built or it's going to be built. In fact, a program that has been established is a program for infrastructure development in Africa. It's quite, in fact, it's quite a project that has a clear action plan. It has a 72 energy infrastructure project, and this is actually one of a kind project, because before such projects were quite scattered and not really integrated. So this is quite a good news in terms of resolving the challenge in terms of lack of infrastructure. Now, a big news for Africa and in terms also of energy is the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. This, in fact, was quite recent. It was January 2021, but it's quite a big news because it creates a common market. So this has a lot of impact also for the EU, because they are now talking to an institution that is quite similar. Of course, it's more they are connected, this country, only in terms of trade. So, but this is quite important because it changes actually the weight the two actors have in the negotiation. Another issue is the adaptation investment. Now, as we mentioned before, Africa only has a limited demand for energy nowadays. Of course, it's set to increase, and that will be the challenge, as we said, but it is in fact a minor contributor to global emissions. Of course, this represents quite a challenge in terms of negotiations, also with the EU, because Africans, of course, not everybody, but this is quite been a very delicate point of negotiation, because many African leaders believe that it's not fair to demand from Africa the same level of actually implementing the same kind of climate action plans that other developed countries are actually putting in place. But actually, the problem also for Africa, as we said, is that they are trying to actually keep up with developments in terms of demography, with a growing society, with a growing demographic, and with the energy demand, and also at the same time to promote climate action. Now, on paper, 53 African countries have submitted a nationally determined contribution, which is needed to actually give an idea of how a country plans to mitigate greenhouse emissions and adapt to climate change. But the problem as well, again, is how these countries will put in practice what is put on paper. And as we mentioned, everything is quite interconnected. So as you can imagine, we mentioned that a problem for these countries is institutional capacity. So it is already a big step to have submitted such indices, because this actually requires quite a lot of money, quite a lot of investment, and a lot of actually planning. Now, opportunities. Here I mentioned actually renewable energy. Now, Africa, when we think of Africa, we think only, as we mentioned, of these challenges, of the fact that is lacking, lagging behind in terms of energy access. That this will be a concerning, an increasingly concerning problem, given the demographics. However, we forget most of the time to mention that it's also the most opportune market for renewable energy, in terms of solar, in terms of hydro, in terms of wind. Now, for example, Mozambique is one of the greenest countries in the world, and it derives 81% of its electricity from hydropower. So there is a lot of untapped potential for European investors. Electricity, as we said, is the backbone of Africa's new energy system, but the goal for Africa and the opportunity they should tap is actually to power electricity with renewables. Now, Africa is home to 60% of the best solar resources globally, but when we said that it's untapped opportunity and potential, yes, it's demonstrated by the fact that only 1% of installed solar capacity is in Africa. Another opportunity that you don't find here in the presentation, but it's of course quite logical, with a growing society and with such a young population. In fact, renewable energies present an opportunity, a big opportunity for the creation of jobs. At the same time, each opportunity is paired with a challenge, meaning that once again, the challenge will be in creating these job opportunities to actually have people that are able to train this population for these new jobs that are created with the renewable energy. Now, why the EU? What is the EU approach to Africa? Now, we can say that the relationship is quite long-standing. In fact, it was formally established already in 2000, and the first African EU summit was actually held in Cairo. And subsequently, what guided this partnership was the joint Africa-EU strategy that was developed, adopted in 2007. And nowadays, in fact, what guides the partnership is towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa, which is a joint communication that the EU has released, aligning what are its priorities. Now, a news in terms of this partnership is that in 2020, the EU created a new platform, and this platform is the Africa Euro Foundation. And in fact, it doesn't only focus on energy, but also on transport, connectivity, food, digital. And it's important to mention that the EU has this view on Africa that does not only concern one main sector, but tries to actually find synergies between these sectors. And this is very important. As we've seen before, we cannot talk about energy without talking about food supply and digitalization, without talking about infrastructure. Now, why? How can we actually see that the EU is continuously and increasingly interested in Africa? We can say that, in fact, recently, the shift towards Africa has been even stronger, because the EU has realized, in fact, that it's not the only institution that is interested in Africa. In fact, EU suffers from competition from other strong international actors, and the main one, it is actually China. Now, China represents a big challenge for the EU presence in Africa. First of all, because it in fact does not ask to African partners for check and balances, for rule of law. It doesn't put conditions, let's say, it doesn't put conditions that are also political on its partners. And this actually, it's more profitable, let's say, for African governors, because it does not ask them to actually change their way of governing, or it doesn't actually concern democratization and human rights and so on. While these are very important for the EU when it acts as it acts in terms of external relations. Now, the EU has understood that this is a challenge, that China is a challenge, and so it already included a Marshall Plan with Africa, one of the biggest actors, Germany, and then President Juncker already in 2018 called for an Africa-Europe alliance for sustainable investment and jobs. And lately, von der Leyen visited Africa 1 week after being elected. Now, this is quite significant, because it means that Africa is an urgency now for the EU. Now, it actually, the partnership, it delineates through dialogue, through projects, and so on. The Africa EU Energy Partnership, for example, is a long-term framework, and it's a strategic dialogue where actually actors from both sides, from the EU, from member states of the EU, but also from single African countries, but also when they are in different institutions, they meet and actually they set political priorities, develop joint programs, and actually it's focused on energy issues. Now, an important initiative is also the long-term joint European Union, African Union Research and Innovation Partnership on renewable energy. This is important, and it actually shows how what we mentioned as an opportunity for Africa, which is renewable energy, has already actually pinpointed by the European Union, and actually the European Union through the external investment plan that was adopted in 2017, it's already trying to focus on sustainable development goal 7, which is access to energy, by focusing the investment in that field. In fact, we can mention that external investment plan initiative, for example, is an interesting one, is the electrification financing initiative that supports the efforts of Africa in terms of renewable energy. Now, I've put actually some projects, recent ones, that are quite interesting. I put 2 where I'm directly involved because my company works with it. One is the EU Global Technical Assistance Facility for Sustainable Energy. And this is a multi-million project, and it's a regional, actually, it's a global project, sorry. And it has quite a focus on Africa. Here, what they do is that they support policymakers, governance, and so on to actually come up with planning, with actually drafting some of the laws that they want to put in place to manage their strategic partnerships, to actually also support the EU and its delegation in various countries in Africa to communicate with each other. But also the focus is in delivering training services, and actually also to develop a way of actually exchanging information, and also disseminate the knowledge that is gathered in all these meetings that are held between various actors. And also another project that we've been involved with is the support to ECOWAS Regional Electricity Regulation Authority. As I mentioned, a big issue for many countries in Africa. This project in particular concerns the West African region in Africa, is actually coming up with laws and with frameworks that can actually guide the work for other actors in the energy field as well. This basis for many countries is missing. So this is quite a big problem when actually they need to prove to foreign investors that they know what they're doing and they know how they want to try to achieve their goals. Another initiative is the Parliamentary Action on Renewable Energy, and this one is again providing a forum to raise awareness, to mobilize politicians, and actually provides a venue where there are roundtables, meetings among MPs, and so on. This is quite important because it's actually it's a venue where there can be a direct communication among these decision makers. There are also three other projects that I deemed very interesting. Of course, there's a plethora of projects. I put in my presentation only the ones that have a regional or continent scope, because there are a myriad of projects that actually touch upon single countries, but I decided to put only the continental one. There's also the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is also a challenge for Africa. With a growing population, of course, there's also a problem in terms of how to deal with increasing urbanization, and also with the challenges that it poses in terms of energy. And this is a project that actually helps cities and supports them in managing and in tackling this challenge in terms of climate change. Then, as we said, there's the Electrification Financing Initiative. It's a 275 plus million facility, and it actually tries and to support Africa in gathering in the investment they need for clean energy. Then there's the Africa Connect, which is a slightly less big project of 37 million euros, and it's actually focused on connectivity, on infrastructure, on providing actually data networks for research, meaning that what they want to do is to improve cooperation and connectivity and the presence of data gathering for local researchers. And this is very important for Africa, because it provides, as we mentioned, that the challenge for Africa is to have an institution capacity. Actually, this is a way of forming local knowledge management. And yes, I I guess I finished. So if you have any question, I hope I didn't go too slow or too fast.